Now, I really am glad to see something like this. So, before I even talk about the premise of what this article is addressing, right? So, for those of you that don't know, Saber is the subsidiary of, well, the former or about to be former subsidiary of Embracer that is being purchased by private investors. They are one of the few subsidiaries of Embracer that has found their way out from underneath the incredibly disgusting, crushing machine that is Embracer. And as we've seen over the past year and a half to 2 years, Embracer has just been destroying everything underneath them, right? It's really, really gross. And Saber has been saved for the moment, anyways, by some private investors. They've also, if you weren't aware, the whole Knights of the Old Republic remake fiasco was originally something that was given to Aspire Studios, which is also another Embracer subsidiary, but they kind of botched it, right? And then after the whole fiasco of Aspire not doing well with that project in the first place, it was handed over to Saber. Well, with Saber's sale to these private investors, Saber has been given the rights to take the Knights of the Old Republic licensing with them for making the remake and everything. But the weird situation here is that it will still also be labeled with Embracer even after it finishes. Even though the game won't finish under Embracer, it started with Embracer, it will still be attached to Embracer on release. So Embracer still stands to profit off of it when it comes to fruition. Saber is still working on it. We've verified that, and they are the ones that have the rights to finish the production of the game, and development of the game, Now, with that prefacing, with that information for those that weren't aware, we now have this coming out from underneath Embracer, or not Embracer, but Saber as well. So $70 games will go the way of the dodo, believes Saber's CEO. The former interim Embracer COO believes developers will move to reduce risk and costs. As I said when I brought this article up, I was so turned off by the fact the industry was heavily pivoting towards games moving from $60 AAA price tags to $70 AAA price tags. And it was because it didn't make sense. Yeah, a lot of these games are becoming more expensive to make, but that's not a recipe for success, right? We know that. We've seen that. Just because a studio is large and they have a lot of resources to throw at a game, whether it be, personnel, manpower, or money to throw at a game, doesn't mean a game's going to be successful. There are so many big studios that have forgotten what it means to create games that are filled with fantastic content, and they just try to find ways to kind of bring people in off of the premise of a universe that appeals to people and fill it with, this is the thing, microtransactions or battle passes or the DLC that comes out a month and a half after the game releases, where that content was ready for the game, but they make you pay, a quarter to half of what the game even cost off the shelf for the DLC that comes out. There's all kinds of ways in which these developers and publishers have found to make you pay more for the games you're already paying AAA price tags for. They were already getting their $70 and more than that. They didn't need to raise the price tag, but they did it anyways. Yeah? I mean, you can look at games like recently, Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League. It was disgusting to see what they did. There was no need for that game to be a $70 price tag game with all the monetization in it and everything. And I mean, it was just gross, right? And this is the world that is being built around us by these big, disgusting developers. There are still good big developers out there. Look at Larian, and there are others, but that's one of the first ones that pops into my head because of, you know, what we've seen from them recently with Baldur's Gate 3 and stuff. And I mean, you know, I'll give you another one. Tango is a subsidiary of Xbox and Microsoft, but dude, they shadow dropped Hi-Fi Rush on us last year, which is a banger of a game at a $30 price tag. Phenomenal. You know, there's still good AAA studios out there doing stuff, but there's a lot of them that do us dirty too. And so it's nice to see a big studio saying something like this as well, because it really was unnecessary. And now, you know, we've got other studios out there like Capcom, who keeps doing more and more gross stuff, like putting microtransactions in a game like Dragon's Dogma 2 that didn't need it, and has been pushing out statements from their CEO saying things like, you know, we need the AAA price tag to go even higher than $70. Right? Where, I mean, how ultra uber disgusting is it to hear that? It just, it's really, really gross. Well, no, Davey, absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely not. But it's still nice to hear it from a big studio standpoint, where like I just said, there are so many other big studios saying the opposite. We just went up over the past year from 60 to 70, and then you've got studios like Capcom saying we need to go from 70 to 80, whenever they're still just slaughtering games with microtransactions that shouldn't even have them in there, right? So no, I mean, this obviously it doesn't mean that this is going to happen, but it's a good thing to see other studios getting behind the notion that this isn't the way. Microsoft and Phil Spencer has said the same thing. He's like, it's getting kind of gross, you know? So for us as gamers and gaming enthusiasts, I think it's good that we have at least some of these studios standing up and saying, hey, this isn't the way, you know? This is not the way to treat fans. It's not the way to treat consumers. There's a balance, don't get me wrong. And we talk a lot about the fact of how much are you getting out of what you're paying for a game. Everybody's going to feel different about that, right? But I've talked a lot about that recently with the fact that Ninja Theory's coming out with Senua's Saga. That's only going to be an 8-hour game, right? Well, obviously I'm talking in US dollars, and everybody's going to have to, you know, convert that to their own region and stuff like that. Everybody's country has a different, you know, conversion of currency. And so, I mean, Australia's the same way, Davey. You know, Australia, New Zealand, you know, the inflation over, well, it's okay. So we can get into that rabbit hole. We can get into that rabbit hole of you're lucky to pay. You know what I mean? There are different benefits that different countries get from, like, why do you pay that much for things, right? So I'm not going to get into that rabbit hole. We pay less for things like that here, but we also don't have some of these social benefits that you guys get. You know what I mean? From having to pay more for some of your, you know, your produce, your economy, things like that. The reason that some of your stuff's more expensive is you have better social constructs for taking care of people and things like that than we do in this country, right? We can get into that whole rabbit hole, but I'm not going to. It's all about video gaming news. So on a very base level, yeah. But there's a reason why that it's more expensive in Canada than the same thing for, you know, other countries, like I said, you know, like Australia, New Zealand, stuff like that. So, but it's still, like I said, it's good to hear some studios that have a voice in the industry of being big stand up for the fact that, you know, games don't necessarily need to be this price. You know, we keep hearing it takes more. It costs more. It takes more resources to make, you know, AAA games. I don't doubt that at all, right? But there's a difference between making good AAA games and bad AAA games too. And we've seen that happen a lot as well. So, I don't know. Let's dive into this and see what they say. So the former interim Embracer CEO believes developers will move to reduce risk and costs. Saber's Interactive CEO Matthew Karsh believes the $70 game will eventually become a thing of the past as developers move to reduce costs and risk in an increasingly challenging AAA games market. Speaking to IGN, former interim CEO of Embracer, Karsh discussed Saber's divestment from the troubled group and where he sees Saber's place in the market as a standalone publisher. The exec said he believes Saber, which encompasses studios like Nimble Giant, 3D Realms, and potentially 4A Games, occupies the position between independent studios and AAA publishers. Karsh cited Helldivers 2 as an example of the type of middle market game it would like to emulate. He told IGN that one of its upcoming titles, Space Marine 2, will retail for $70, but only because he's concerned audiences would see a cheaper price as emblematic of poor quality. I think that as games become more expensive to make, $70 title is going to go the way of the dodo bird. I do, he said. I just don't think it's sustainable. Look, you remember the hype for Cyberpunk, which I think actually ultimately performed okay. But when the expectations are so high and so much money is put into one title, it's hugely risky for the company that's doing it. What if it fails? You remember what happened when Ubi a couple of years ago, all of their titles slipped out of the year, and then all of a sudden they were in an entirely different place. It's hard to recover from that. I think the market is going to shift to development, which is not necessarily lower quality. There's going to be an emphasis on trying to find ways to reduce costs. I think this is important. I've been talking about this for a while. I think that, you know, it's there's some of this, but it's also about getting companies, these development companies, back into a notion of good content, right? Yeah, it feels like so many of these big studios that have done this are like just riddled with business-minded people. I've talked about this before, right? Yeah, like, it's not that there aren't good gaming-minded people in these companies, but they are just swallowed and overrun with business-minded people that don't know anything about what it means to push out good gaming content to us as consumers and gaming enthusiasts anymore. So what do is they try to push out the scummiest version of something mediocre anymore that they feel like will just be able to ring our wallets, you know? And it feels like it's been happening for a long time, but at some point that levee is going to break. It's got to, you know, where people start seeing through the bull crap, you know, whether it's these companies that push out quantity over quality, right, with things like Modern Warfare or, you know, the Assassin's Creed stuff. Yeah, and it's not that all those games have been terrible, but I mean, I don't think anybody's going to argue with the fact that those games could be much better if they spent a couple to a few more years on the individual titles instead of pushing them out like candy. You know what I mean? Or these titles that come out that have been spent years on, but all they really did was focus on getting some kind of decent core mechanics in that really is nothing special, and they're built on a premise of a universe that people love, like WB does all the time with something like Suicide Squad, and it's riddled with monetization. You know, they knew that game wasn't going to be good. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it out at a $70 price tag. They would have been more worried about building a sustainable player base. They would have been more worried, you know, they would have given out, you know, review copies of that game to review sites, but they didn't want to do. They knew that game wasn't very good. They knew that. You know, well, yeah, and Davey, you're absolutely right. And that's one of the reasons the monetization in Dragon's Dogma 2 feels so terribly bad. You know what I mean? So that's what I was talking about originally when the game came out. It was like, dude, they were going to make a ton of money off this game anyways. So even at it's a $70 game. For Capcom, there were so many people that were going to be buying that game, there was no need for the monetization in it. That's why there will always be this like kind of black cloud hanging over this game. The content's phenomenal. You know, it needs a little bit of love on performance. It's good enough. The content is good enough to have people overlook the performance issues, but the microtransactions were unnecessary. And it's really just disgusting to see it, right? Even at a $60 price tag, it would have been hugely lucrative for them. Absolutely. No doubt about it. You know, you're absolutely right, buddy. Soup, what's up, buddy? Soup's in here inciting violence already, dude. But I think this is, this is part of it, as well as the fact that these studios, these developers, these publishers there's too much business, not enough gamers, not enough gaming minded people. And it doesn't mean that business should go out the window. That's not what I'm saying. These are businesses. They have to be business minded. But this is an industry where you're going to lose fans, you're going to lose consumers eventually if you don't maintain some kind of moderate mindset at producing quality content for your consumers and your fan base. That's just the way it works. People start seeing through your bull crap, And it's I think you're starting to see even bigger studios that are still shining. Like I said, like with Larian, they're big, dude. They're like a 500 plus employee studio, developer studio. They're independent and they take care of business, dude. They've got great customer support. It's not like everybody loves everything they do, but most people love most of what they do. And that's a stark contrast from the things you see with like companies like what EA's turned into, what Blizzard's turned into, what Ubi's turned into, all of that stuff. You know what I mean? And I think it's easier to see a company like Larian being able to sustain that mindset for the long haul, as opposed to what we've seen happen with those companies I just named and how they turned into these just juggernauts of greed. You know what I mean? We all know why they got to where they're at. They were phenomenal developers at one point. We all fell in love with some of these studios that have lost their way in some form or fashion throughout the years, because at one point in their early years, they were amazingly good, but they lost it. They became consumed with greed. With thousands of job cuts announced across the games industry in the past 18 months, Karch acknowledged that AAA development is going through a major shift and claimed that past trends of sky-high budgets and lengthy development periods aren't sustainable. I think that there's going to be a real shortage of game content over the coming few years, he said. You've seen how many layoffs there have been. You've seen how many games have gotten killed. We have a lot of good projects going on that I'm proud of, and I feel really, really strongly about. I'm so glad that Saber got out from underneath Embracer. I cannot, even whenever we first heard Embracer, or Saber was being sold to private investors out from underneath Embracer, I was like, dude, Saber's got to be wiping their brow, It's got to be an incredibly, like just a huge breath of fresh air for Saber to be like out from underneath Embracer. I think Gearbox has to feel the same way. Now they're under Take Two, which doesn't mean they're like free and clear, but much better than being underneath Embracer anymore, Gearbox, because they got sold to Take Two as well, if you didn't know that. But for all those studios that have been under Embracer for the past couple of years, just feels like they were all just sitting there just holding their breath going, oh, Jesus, not me next, man. Not me next, So it's good to hear this. I think that we need more of these companies and executives having this kind of notion that it's like, more money does not mean better games. It just doesn't. Now, there's something to be said for a good, high-quality production game, but the content's got to be there. If the content's there, then all you're doing is making a high-budget trash game, And there's some companies that are still big AAA companies that do high-budget content very well, and then there are some that do high-budget content very poorly anymore on the constant. And it's I think a lot of people are starting to see through a lot of this stuff.